Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we really get into the weeds, take some dense, critical info, and, well, turn it into the kind of knowledge you need to think like a real pro.
And today, yeah, we're not just flipping through sources. We are essentially laying out the foundational blueprints for security leadership, the mission, a really intensive deep dive into CISSP Domain-1, security and risk management.
Right. And tackling this domain means we're making a conscious shift here. Forget the blinking lights on the firewalls for a second, or the IDS logs, or the specifics of AES encryption. This stuff, it's about governance, not the gear itself.
Exactly.
It's about why we splash the cash on that gear in the first place. And maybe even more importantly, who ends up in court personally when that gear inevitably fails.
That's precisely the right way to frame it. The materials we've dug into, they focus on the structure, the frameworks that dictate how organizations assess their risk, how they put actual dollar figures on potential losses, navigate this absolute maze of legal obligations, and, at the end of the day, make sure the business can actually survive a catastrophe.
So our goal here is to pull out that critical, non-technical insight, the stuff that takes someone who's great at implementing tech and turns them into a business leader. It's that fundamental shift, isn't it? Seeing security not just as a tech problem, but as a core business function, a constant governance challenge.
And the key takeaway, really, is that security governance acts like the steering wheel, not the emergency brake. It has to be driven from the top down. Senior management setting clear goals, communicating directives really explicitly across, everywhere, and setting up ways to check performance. Without that executive push, you end up with what you might call a lumpy security program, brilliant in the spots where the tech team is passionate, but dangerously weak everywhere else.
Okay, all right. Let's start unpacking this right from the absolute bedrock principles that define the whole field. The CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
These really are the three pillars. Everything in information protection rests on them. So, confidentiality, first off, that's all about secrecy. Simple as that. Preventing unauthorized disclosure of information.
And how do we do that?
Well, typically through things like encryption, strong access controls, classifying data properly so everyone understands how sensitive it is, basic blocking and tackling, really.
Okay, and then integrity. People often mix this up with confidentiality, but they're definitely not the same thing.
Yeah, they're distinct goals. Integrity is about making sure the data is accurate, that it's whole. It means the information hasn't been messed with without authorization. And if it is changed, that modification has to be authorized and, crucially, verifiable.
Like in finance.
Exactly. Think about a bank transfer. Money moves from account A to account B. Integrity ensures the amount transferred is correct and that the whole transaction was logged properly and, approved by the right people or systems.
Makes sense. And the third one, availability. I think sometimes people just think uptime, but it's actually broader, isn't it?
Oh, much broader. Availability is the assurance that authorized users can actually get to the resources they need when they need them. And the threats here, they aren't always hackers.
Right.
Often they're physical or environmental. Things like fire, floods, power cuts, the HVAC failing in the server room, even just network cables degrading over time. All of that threatens availability. A good security leader has to worry about a hurricane just as much as a hacker.
I think the really insightful bit here is realizing how these three things are always kind of pushing and pulling against each other. You can't just max out all three at once.
That's the fundamental management puzzle. Take the classic, slightly silly example. If you want perfect confidentiality and integrity, you could bury your top secret file on a desert island. Great CNI. But availability? Zero.
Right. Not very useful.
Exactly. Or in a real-world place, like a hospital, they might consciously decide to accept, say, slightly less strict confidentiality measures, maybe slower two-factor logins instead of instant access, because maximum availability is paramount. In a life or death situation, getting those patient records now is non-negotiable. That trade-off, that's risk management in a nutshell.
And we also need to bring in a couple more related ideas here, the ones that really deal with accountability. Authenticity and non-repudiation. Authenticity is just proving who you are at a given moment.
Basically, yeah. Authenticity confirms identity. Are you Bob? Yes, here are my credentials. Simple. But authenticity by itself doesn't prove Bob actually did something later on. And that's where non-repudiation becomes, legally and ethically vital.
Non-repudiation.
Well,
that means you can't realistically deny you did something or agreed to something. The sources used a brilliant kind of funny, hypothetical legal defense to explain this.
Oh, the cat defense, yeah. If you sign, say, a big online loan application using just a basic username and password, you could theoretically argue in court, well, I just stepped away from my desk for a minute and my cat walked across the keyboard and hit submit.
Seriously. Could that actually work?
Ridiculous as it sounds, yeah, it could potentially hold up if the bank or whoever didn't have a solid non-repudiation mechanism in place.
Wow. Okay, so the cat defense gets shot down by needing some kind of second, undeniable proof of intent.
Precisely. Non-repudiation needs more than just basic authentication. It demands undeniable historical proof of intent. Things like a digital signature, maybe a biometric scan, or even just a simple personal identification number, a PI, that only the user should know.
So if Bob had to enter his PI,
Then that action is historically undeniable. Bob can't blame the cat. Non-repudiation turns simple authentication into legally solid accountability. Hashtag governance and executive accountability.
okay, so this flows really nicely from the technical goals into the management structure itself. Security governance. This is what makes IT compliance a real business issue.
Security governance is basically the system where senior management sets the security goals, communicates those directives clearly, and then verifies that the whole organization is actually meeting those standards. Its most critical job is alignment, making sure security efforts actually help, not hinder, the overall business strategy.
You often see this contrast, right? Like Company B, where the board just sees security as this annoying cost center buried somewhere in IT's budget, versus Company A, where the board actively asks for quarterly risk updates and views strong security as like a competitive advantage.
And you definitely want to be Company A. You want security to open up new possibilities. For instance, say the business wants to slash real estate costs by 30% by going fully remote permanently. Security's job then is to step up and make that huge financial goal happen safely.
Yeah.
By providing secure VPNs, solid cloud access controls, strong endpoint protection, you know the drill. Suddenly, security isn't just a cost. It's enabling a massive profit-boosting move.
But the real bite behind this governance stuff is C-suite liability. We're not just talking corporate fines anymore. This is personal risk for the CEO, the CFO, CIO, CSO.
Oh, yeah. This personal jeopardy comes straight from laws like Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX, which came about after those huge financial blowups like Enron, remember? SOX put incredibly strict rules on financial reporting and introduced the very real threat of massive personal fines, even jail time, for CEOs and CFOs if they knowingly fudge the numbers or just fail to implement proper data controls.
And we saw this personal liability hit the security world hard after the Equifax breach in 2017. That wasn't just a slap on the wrist for the company. Individuals face serious consequences.
The sources mention, yeah, former CISO faced obstruction of justice charges, apparently, for trying to cover things up. And a former CIO was actually convicted of insider trading sold stock after learning about the breach, but before telling the public.
Ouch.
That's the stark reality of governance now. Executives can't just say, oh, I delegated security to IT. A major failure is now a potential personal legal nightmare, especially for the CIO, who's typically responsible for protecting all the organization's assets and making sure the whole security program works, reporting right up to the CEO, hashtag delineating key security roles.
Okay, so since the execs face this ultimate personal risk, they've got to delegate effectively down the line. And getting these roles mixed up is a classic sign of a, well, less mature security setup.
Absolutely. You have to clearly define those management and operational roles below the C-suite. Starting with the data owner. This is the person with the ultimate responsibility for a specific set of data and making sure the right level of due care is applied to it.
So the data owner is the boss of the data.
Pretty much. They decide its classification, like, is it public, internal, confidential? They're the ones approving access requests. They set the overall protection strategy for that data.
Got it. So the owner decides the what and why of protection. Who actually does the hands-on work of securing it?
That falls to the data custodian. The custodian role is delegated. They handle the day-to-day practical maintenance of the protection mechanisms. They're configuring the firewalls, managing backups, making sure encryption is running correctly, patching systems. They implement what the owner requires.
Okay, owner sets policy, custodian implements, and then there's the system owner. What's their piece?
The system owner is responsible for the overall platform, the operating system, the application, the server that processes or stores the data. And one system might hold data belonging to multiple data owners, right?
Ah, well,
So the system owner's job is to make sure security is built into that platform's whole lifecycle, from purchasing or development through maintenance. Things like OS hardening, proper password policies on the system itself, that's their domain.
so here's where it gets tricky, maybe. What if the data owner says, this data needs Fort Knox level protection, but the data custodian looks at the budget and says, I need 50 grand for the gear to do that, and I don't have it. Who sorts that out?
That tension is precisely why you need strong governance, and that policy pyramid we'll get to. Usually, it's the security director or the CISO reporting up the chain who has to flag that disconnect. If the owner sets a requirement the custodian can't meet due to budget constraints, that risk has to be formally documented and either accepted by senior management or the budget needs to be found. Just ignoring that gap, that's walking right into negligence territory.
Makes sense. And to manage the people involved in these roles, we use some core administrative controls. Separation of duties and mandatory vacations are the big ones.
Right. Separation of duties, or SOD, that's a preventive control. The idea is simple. Make sure no single person can complete a really critical or high-risk task all by themselves. You set it up so committing fraud or sabotage would require at least two people colluding.
Like needing 2 keys to launch the missiles?
Exactly like that. Or dual custody in a bank vault. Same principle.
And mandatory vacations.
Huh.
That sounds less like prevention and more like, well, a nice perk.
Huh. It's actually a crucial detective control. Employees in sensitive roles, maybe handling finances or critical data access, are forced to take a proper chunk of time off, usually 2 consecutive weeks. During that time, someone else has to perform their duties. Because people involved in shady stuff like ongoing fraud often avoid taking vacations. They're terrified their scheme will unravel if someone else gets a clear look at their work. Forcing the vacation is a surprisingly effective way to uncover anomalies or outright fraud that might otherwise stay hidden.
Okay, so we've got accountability nailed down the C-suite. We've got roles owner, custodian, system owner. Now we need the actual paperwork, the structure that communicates what management wants done. This is the security documentation hierarchy, the policy pyramid, as you called it.
Yeah, and this pyramid is super important because it's part of the C-suite's legal shield. It helps prove they exercise due diligence. Right at the top, forming the solid base, you have policy.
Okay, policy.
These are formal, high-level statements issued by senior management, backed by their authority. They're meant to apply organization-wide, and crucially, they're built to last. You don't change policies lightly. A policy says what the organization intends to achieve, something like, all employees must use strong authentication methods.
Broad strokes.
Yeah.
So underneath that, you need the specifics. That's standards.
Exactly. Standards are mandatory. They lay out the specific requirements for how you meet the policy goals. So if the policy says use strong authentication, the standard might mandate, say, specific hardware tokens or require all passwords be at least 16 characters long and expire every 90 days. They're compulsory.
Still mandatory, but maybe change a bit more often than policies.
Yeah, slightly more flexible than policies, but still not something you change on a whim. They set the baseline technical or procedural requirements.
Got it. Then we get down to the real how-to level, procedures.
Procedures are the step-by-step instructions, the actual recipe. They detail the exact actions an employee needs to take to follow the standard. So, for our password example, the procedure would list the literal steps an IT admin follows to configure the servers to enforce that 16-character minimum.
And these need tight control.
Absolutely strict change control. Because they dictate the day-to-day actions, changing a procedure can immediately change your security posture. You need to manage that carefully, often based on risk assessment.
Okay, and the last layer at the bottom, guidelines.
Guidelines are the recommendations, the best practices, general approaches, they're optional suggestions, providing flexibility for situations maybe not perfectly covered by the mandatory docs. Think of them as helpful advice, not hard rules. Hashtag the ethical imperative into technical contexts.
All right, this is where things take a bit of a turn, isn't it? Moving from just mandatory rules to, well, moral obligations. The sources really hammer home this point, that the ethical responsibility on tech experts is growing way faster than laws can keep up.
It's just the nature of technology accelerating so quickly, the sheer scale, the speed, the complexity of things like AI, massive data harvesting, deepfakes. It's all moving much faster than governments can possibly legislate. And honestly, the people writing the laws often don't have the deep technical understanding needed to regulate effectively anyway.
Which means the ethical weight falls squarely on the shoulders of the people building and implementing this stuff. The security pros making design choices every single day that have huge societal impacts.
Exactly. Technology isn't neutral. It never is. It inherently reflects the values and sometimes the biases of the people who create it. Just think about the ethical implications of collecting vast amounts of facial or voice recognition data.
Yeah.
The legal rules around it might be patchy or inconsistent, but the digital records created can expose incredibly sensitive personal details. Someone's hidden medical history, their religious affiliation, maybe sensitive behavioral patterns, things people might not even realize are being captured.
And if that data gets breached, the ethical failure is just compounded, right?
Right.
Because there often isn't a clear legal safety net for the victims. This links right into that idea of technology justice you mentioned.
Absolutely. You can't talk ethics without talking justice. Technology's benefits and, critically, its risks are often spread really unevenly across society. They tend to amplify existing inequalities. So justice here isn't just about following the letter of the law. It's a fundamental ethical duty to think about fairness.
How so?
It means actively considering how to ensure access to tech benefits and exposure to data risks are distributed more equitably. The security professional has an ethical obligation, arguably, to especially prioritize protecting vulnerable groups who might suffer disproportionately from, say, a data breach. Hashtag due diligence versus due care. Planning versus doing.
Okay, so swinging back from ethics to legal liability. This brings us to two terms that constantly get confused: due diligence and due care. One's about planning, the other's about actually doing it.
That's a great way to put it. Due diligence is the strategic upfront work. It's doing your homework, gathering information, researching threats, establishing the policies, the plans, the procedures we just talked about. It's primarily a management responsibility.
Like deciding you need a patch management program or building a full asset inventory, defining those rules we discussed.
Exactly. That's all due diligence. It's the planning phase, getting your ducks in a row.
And due care is?
Due care is the execution phase. It's consistently following the plan. It's acting responsibly, day in, day out, adhering to the defined procedures. Things like actually applying the patches on time, providing the required annual security training, making sure sensitive data gets encrypted according to policy that is due care. And it applies to everyone in the organization, not just management.
The Equifax breach, the one that led to those executive consequences we talked about, seems like a textbook example of failing on both fronts.
Oh, absolutely. They failed due diligence because audits apparently showed they didn't even have a complete, accurate inventory of their assets. How can you protect what you don't know you have? And they didn't seem to prioritize patching based on how critical systems were. So the plan itself was flawed.
And the due care failure.
They apparently didn't even follow the patching plan they did have consistently. Reports mention things like relying on an honor system for patching critical vulnerabilities, just didn't act fast enough on known serious weaknesses. That double failure, poor planning, and poor execution of even basic care is what ramped up their liability towards gross negligence. Hashtag global compliance, data privacy, and intellectual property.
Right. And security governance now is unavoidably global. Leaders have to juggle the differences between, say, common law systems like the US and UK, which are built on precedent, and civil law systems like in much of Europe, which are based on detailed codified rules. This whole complex mess often boils down to handling personally identifiable information, or PII.
Yeah, and while the U.S. has sort of a patchwork of state-level privacy laws, the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, has really become the global standard everyone watches. GDPR has this incredibly broad definition of what counts as protected personal data. It's not just name and address. It includes things like web cookies, biometric data, even inferred cultural profiles.
So what are the absolute must-knows about GDPR for security leaders?
The big shift is towards individual rights. Companies have to ensure they get explicit consent to use personal data. They have to respect the right to be forgotten. Letting people demand their data gets permanently deleted. There's also the right to restrict processing. But operationally, for security teams on the ground, that breach notification rule is the killer.
Oh, yeah. How fast do you have to report a breach under GDPR?
Okay, get this. Data controllers generally have to report a significant data breach to the relevant EU supervisory authority no later than 72 hours after becoming aware of it.
72 hours, that's incredibly fast.
It's brutal. You're still potentially fighting the fire, trying to figure out what happened, contain the damage, deal with attackers, and this clock is ticking down. Miss it, and you're looking at potentially massive fines up to 4% of your annual global revenue. It forces organizations to have their incident response and due diligence processes incredibly well rehearsed.
Wow. Okay, moving beyond personal data, companies also need to protect their own creations' intellectual property.
Right. We usually talk about four main types here. Trade secrets, think secret formulas. Customer lists, they protect confidential info that gives you a competitive edge. Protection lasts as long as you keep it secret. Then trademarks, logos, brand names, colors protect your brand identity, renewable pretty much forever.
And patents.
Patents offer the strongest protection, usually for inventions, granting exclusive rights for a set term, typically 20 years. There's also copyright for creative works.
So what's the security team's main job in legally defending this IP?
It comes back to due care again. If you want to successfully sue someone for stealing your trade secret or infringing your copyright, you first have to prove in court that you took reasonable steps, exercised due care to protect it internally. Meaning having physical security, strong access controls, clear policies, NDAs with employees. If you were sloppy about protecting your own secrets, your legal case against someone else stealing them gets much, much weaker.
Got it. And with everyone outsourcing so much data processing now, cloud providers, contractors, there's the critical point about liability the sources emphasize.
Yeah, this is huge. You can delegate the function of processing data, but you can never outsource the ultimate accountability for protecting it. If you hire a vendor, sign a service level agreement, SLA, and they have a breach involving your data, you, the original data owner, are still on the hook legally.
That's downstream liability.
Exactly. It highlights why vetting and managing your supply chain risk isn't just optional anymore. It's absolutely essential.
Okay, so if security is a business function, leaders need to speak the language of business, which is often money. That means we need ways to translate these fuzzy ideas of threats and vulnerabilities into clear dollars and cents decisions about where to spend resources. We need to start with getting our terms straight.
Right. Risk is the core concept we're managing. It's usually defined as the likelihood, the probability of a specific threat successfully exploiting a specific vulnerability to cause harm to an asset and the resulting business impact of that harm.
So a threat is the bad thing that could happen, the hacker group, the hurricane, the employee making a mistake.
Yep. And the vulnerability is the weakness that lets the threat cause harm, the unpatched server, the weak password policy, the single point of failure in the power supply.
And the countermeasure or control or safeguard, that's what we put in place to reduce the risk.
Exactly, like a firewall or security awareness training or better physical locks. Now, if we find a big vulnerability, say in our patching process, we can't just say fix it. We need to quantify the risk before deciding how much effort or money it's worth spending.
And the main way to justify that spend to the finance folks is quantitative risk analysis, putting actual numbers on potential losses.
This is the objective approach, trying to assign monetary values and probabilities to risk components. We use three key formulas. First up is the single loss expectancy, or SLE.
SLE. That's the estimated cost if a specific bad thing happens just once.
Precisely. SLE is calculated by taking the asset value, AV, what the thing you're protecting is worth, whether it's data, hardware, reputation, and multiplying it by the exposure factor, EF.
Exposure factor.
EF is the percentage of the asset's value you expect to lose in that single event. If a fire completely wipes out a server worth $1 million, the EF is 100%, so the SLE is $1 million. If a minor incident damages it slightly, maybe the EF is only 10%, and the SLE is $100,000.
Okay, SLE is cost per incident. Next, we need to know how often it happens. That's the annualized rate of occurrence, or ARO.
ARO is just frequency. Based on historical data, industry stats, or educated guesses, how many times per year do we expect this specific event to occur? If a major outage happens, on average, once every 10 years, the ARO is 0.1. If it happens twice a year, the ARO is 2.0.
Simple enough. And combining SLE and ARO gives us the big one. The annual loss expectancy, or ALE. This is the total expected financial hit per year from that specific risk.
Right. The formula is just ALE is SLE x ARO. Let's run a quick example. Say we have a database with sensitive customer PII. Let's value that asset, AV, considering fines, reputation damage, recovery costs at $2 million. Now, let's estimate that if a breach occurs, the total impact costs about 25% of that asset value. So the exposure factor, EF, is 0.25. What's our SLE?
$2 billion times 0.25. That's $500,000. That's the cost per breach.
Perfect. Now, let's say our threat intelligence suggests this specific type of breach is likely to happen about once every 5 years. So the ARO is 1 divided by 5, which is 0.2.
Okay, so ALE, $500,000 SLE times 0.2 ARO gives us an ALE of $100,000 per year.
Exactly. And that $100,000 ALE figure is powerful. It represents the mathematically justified maximum amount you should reasonably budget annually for controls specifically designed to mitigate that particular risk. If you find yourself spending $150,000 a year on countermeasures for it, you're arguably overspending relative to the calculated risk.
Yeah.
Hashtag risk treatment and cost effectiveness.
Right. So once we have that ALE number, we use it to decide how to handle the risk. What are our options? The sources list 4 main strategies: mitigate, transfer, avoid, or accept.
Mitigate is usually the default. You implement controls, firewalls, training, encryption, whatever, to reduce the likelihood or impact of the risk down to an acceptable level. Transfer involves shifting the financial consequences to someone else.
Like buying cyber insurance.
That's the classic example. Or sometimes you can build liability clauses into contracts with vendors or partners using that SLA we mentioned. Avoid means you simply decide not to engage in the activity that creates the risk. Like, maybe choosing not to deploy a particularly risky new system or process at all?
Accept. That's when you just live with it.
Essentially, yes, but it has to be an informed decision. You accept the risk when your analysis shows that the cost of implementing an effective countermeasure, the true cost, is actually higher than the potential loss you calculated, the ALE.
But it shouldn't just be ignoring it.
Absolutely not. Risk acceptance must always be a formal, documented decision, approved by the appropriate level of management who understands the potential consequences. It's not just forgetting about the problem.
And crucial to getting that calculation right is understanding the huge difference between just the purchase price of a control and its total cost over its lifetime.
Oh, this is where so many budgets go wrong. Say a company buys a new intrusion detection system, IDS, for, $5,500 off the shelf. That's just the box price. The true cost, the total cost of ownership, has to include everything else.
Like what?
Product purchase, sure, but also software licenses, the staff time spent designing and planning the deployment, the labor costs for implementation, the cost of training staff to use and manage it, ongoing maintenance contracts, the salaries or partial salaries of the people monitoring it, 247, and the really tricky one, the potential negative impact on user productivity caused by new security friction.
Yeah, the sources had a really stark example of this, that $5,500 sticker price for the IDS.
Yeah.
Once you add up all those other factors, labor, training, maintenance, maybe some lost productivity from stricter rules, could easily spiral into a true cost of, say, $36,000 over its useful life.
Exactly. Now, if the ALE for the risk that IDS was supposed to fix was only, say, $9,000 per year, the company just spent $36,000 trying to solve a $9,000 problem.
That's not a good return on investment.
Not at all. They effectively wasted $27,000. Risk analysis isn't just about finding vulnerabilities. It's about making financially sound, cost-effective decisions to manage them. Hashtag threat actors and attack methods.
Okay, so to manage risk well, we also need to understand who might attack us. We need to categorize the threat actors based on what drives them and what they're capable of.
Right. The most common ones you'll encounter are cyber criminals. Their motivation is almost always greed, financial gain. This group runs the gamut from fairly low-skilled script kiddies just running automated tools, all the way up to highly sophisticated, organized crime syndicates running ransomware-as-a-service empires. They often operate like actual businesses.
At the other end of the spectrum, capability-wise, are the nation-state actors.
These are the intelligence agencies or military units of governments. They tend to be highly selective about their targets. Their goals are usually long-term espionage, gaining persistent access to critical infrastructure, like power grids or communications, or sometimes political disruption or sabotage.
And they have serious resources.
Huge resources, often incredibly patient. An interesting wrinkle is that sometimes nation-states will actually use criminal groups to carry out certain attacks, giving the state a layer of plausible deniability. Oh, it wasn't us, it was those hackers.
Sneaky. But the threat that keeps CISOs up at night, regardless of their budget, is the insider.
Yeah, the insider threat is arguably the most damaging and the hardest to defend against. Why?
Oh.
Because these individuals already have legitimate access. They know the systems, they know the weaknesses, they know where the valuable data is.
And they come in different flavors.
Broadly, you can classify them as either negligent. These are employees who fail to exercise due care. Maybe they violate policy accidentally through carelessness, click on a phishing link, lose a laptop. Or malicious. These are insiders actively trying to cause harm, maybe seeking revenge, committing fraud, or stealing intellectual property, often right before they quit or get fired.
Yeah.
The existence of the insider threat is a primary driver behind adopting zero-trust security models.
Makes sense. Trust no one internally either. And finally, there's this increasingly common attack method in our interconnected world: island hopping.
Island hopping, sometimes called a supply chain attack, exploits the fact that the ultimate target, maybe a huge, well-defended corporation, might be too hard to breach directly. So what does the attacker do?
Go after someone easier.
Exactly. They target a smaller, likely less secure entity that does business with the main target. Could be a small supplier, a contractor, a law firm, anyone who has trusted network access into the ultimate victim's systems. By compromising that weaker link, the island, they effectively hop over the main defenses and land inside the target network via that trusted connection. It's a huge focus area for supply chain risk management now. Hashtag my fifth sive. Continuity and frameworks, the blueprints for security.
Okay, shifting gears a bit towards resilience. We've talked about preventing bad things, but now let's focus on ensuring the organization can actually survive and get back on its feet when disaster does strike. We need to be clear on the difference between business continuity and disaster recovery.
Yeah, this distinction is fundamental. Business continuity planning, BCP, is the big picture. It's the overall strategy and set of plans to keep the essential parts of the business running or resume them quickly during and after any kind of major disruption. Could be a natural disaster, could be a pandemic, could be a massive cyber attack.
So BCP is about keeping the business functioning. What's DRP then?
Disaster recovery planning, DRP, is really a subset of the BCP. DRP focuses specifically on the technical side of things, the procedures to recover IT systems, applications, and data after a major catastrophe has happened. Think restoring servers from backup, activating a secondary data center.
So BCP keeps people working, DRP gets the computers working again, and the absolute first step for creating either of these plans is the business impact analysis, the BIA.
The BIA is non-negotiable. It's the foundation. You use it to identify every single critical business function and the IT systems that support them. Then you assess the impact, operational impact, financial impact if those functions or systems go down, and critically, you calculate the maximum tolerable downtime, MTD, for each one.
MTD, that's the absolute breaking point.
Pretty much. It's the longest amount of time a specific business function can be unavailable before the damage becomes truly unacceptable, potentially threatening the survival of the entire organization. The MTD, derived from the BIA, is what dictates your recovery priorities. It tells you which systems are Tier 1 must be back up in minutes or hours versus Tier 3 systems that maybe could wait a few days or a week.
And there are established processes for developing these plans, like from NIST.
Yeah, NIST Special Publication 834 lays out a pretty standard lifecycle approach. It involves about 7 key steps. First, develop the overarching continuity policy statement. Then, conduct that critical BIA. Identify preventive controls to try and stop disruptions from happening in the first place. Create contingency strategies like where will we recover, how will we do it, hot site, cold site. Then develop the detailed DRP and BCP documents themselves. Then, crucially, test the plans, train the people, run exercises, and finally, ongoing maintenance, keep the plans updated as the business changes. Hashtag risk management frameworks, RMFs.
Okay, so to make sure all this governance, documentation, risk analysis, and continuity planning we've discussed isn't just ad hoc, but systematic and repeatable, organizations lean on standard risk management frameworks, or RMFs.
Right. An RMF provides a structured process, a foundation, for managing risk consistently across the organization. There are several well-known ones, like the NIST RMF, ISO 27005, which focuses on risk management specifically, FAIR for quantifying risk, OSTAVE. The NIST RMF is particularly widely adopted, especially in government and related industries.
What's the structure of the NIST RMF?
It's a formal 7-step process designed around the system development lifecycle. Prepare the organization, categorize the information system, select the appropriate security controls, implement the controls, assess if they're working correctly, authorize the system for operation based on risk acceptance, and continuously monitor the system and controls.
Let's zoom in on that categorization step. That seems to link back directly to our CIA triad from the beginning.
It does, absolutely. Categorization, often using guidance from another NIST doc, SP 860, is all about figuring out the potential impact if a system's confidentiality, integrity, or availability is compromised. You assign an impact level low, moderate, or high for each of those 3 objectives, CIA.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's take a customer relationship management system, a CRM. It might contain sensitive customer data, so maybe the impact of a confidentiality breach is rated high. If the data gets corrupted, maybe orders get messed up, so the integrity impact is medium. But if the CRM is offline for a day, maybe sales reps are inconvenienced, but the business doesn't grind to a halt, so the availability impact is low.
So the security category, SC, would be written like SC, confidentiality high, integrity medium, availability low.
Exactly. And the rule is that the overall impact category for the system is determined by the highest impact rating across CI or A. So in this case, even though availability impact is low because confidentiality is high, that CRM system is categorized as a high impact system overall.
And that high rating then dictates the level of security controls you have to select and implement later in the RMF process.
Precisely. Higher impact systems require more stringent, robust controls. It drives the whole process. #tag information security program frameworks.
Okay, so beyond frameworks for managing risk on specific systems like the RMF, organizations also need broader blueprints for running their entire security program. Holistic frameworks, two big international ones often come up.
First is the ISO IE's 27000 series.
Yeah, specifically ISO 27001. This is really the global benchmark standard for establishing, implementing, operating, monitoring, reviewing, maintaining, and continually improving an information security management system, or ISMS. It's very focused on taking a risk-based approach to management and achieving operational maturity. Getting formally certified against ISO 27001 is a very common and internationally recognized way for an organization to demonstrate it's exercising due diligence.
And the other big one, especially prominent in the US and for critical infrastructure, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF. Right. The NIST CSF is technically voluntary, though widely adopted. It was initially aimed at critical infrastructure, but is useful for almost any organization. It provides a risk-based approach structured around 5 core functions: identify, understand your risks, assets, etc., protect, implement safeguards, detect, find incidents quickly, respond, take action during an incident, and recover, restore normal operations afterwards.
How does it compare to ISO 27001?
CSF is often seen as maybe a bit more accessible, especially for organizations just starting to build a formal security program. It provides a good high-level structure, particularly emphasizing that whole incident response and recovery lifecycle. ISO 27001 is generally considered more comprehensive and detailed for building a mature, certifiable ISMS. Many organizations actually map their controls to both.
And underneath these high-level program frameworks, you have the massive list of actual controls, right? Yeah. The detailed controls frameworks.
Oh, yeah. This is where you get into the nitty-gritty. NIST Special Publication 853 is the monster catalog. It has something like over 1,000 specific security and privacy controls organized into 20 different families. It's incredibly comprehensive, often used in federal systems. Then you have things like the CIS controls the Center for Internet Security Controls.
Those are more focused?
Much more focused. CIS controls distill security down to about 20 top-level critical controls, broken into about 171 specific subcontrols. They're prioritized based on real-world attack data and grouped into implementation tiers. The idea is that by implementing the CIS controls effectively, you can mitigate the vast majority of the most common cyber attacks seen today. Very actionable.
Okay, one last piece for structure.
Yeah.
How do we measure if our whole security program is actually getting better over time or just treading water? That's where the capability maturity model, CMM, comes in.
Exactly. CMM, or similar maturity models, provide a way to assess and measure the maturity and effectiveness of your processes, including your security processes. It defines distinct, progressive levels of maturity.
What are they typically?
It usually starts at level 1. Initial or chaotic processes are unpredictable, reactive, ad hoc. Then level 2, repeatable or managed. Basic processes are established, maybe followed sometimes. Level 3, defined processes are standardized, documented, and integrated. Level 4, quantitatively managed, you're measuring process performance with metrics. And finally, level 5, optimizing, you have continuous process improvement, actively using feedback and data to refine and innovate.
So CMM helps the security leader demonstrate progress.
Precisely. It helps show management that security isn't just a one-off project or a static cost center. It's an ongoing business process that can and should mature over time, becoming progressively more effective and efficient at reducing risk. It provides a roadmap for improvement. #tag outro, final takeaways and provocation.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a ton of ground here. A really exhaustive deep dive. From the core principles of CIA, through nailing down executive accountability in the C-suite, learning how to quantify risk with tools like ALE to justify spending, and finally layering on the structure with policies, standards, and frameworks like NIST RMF and ISO 27001.
I think the absolute fundamental realization for anyone listening, especially those aspiring to leadership in this field, is this. Security is not a project with an end date. It's a continuous, cyclical process. Your job isn't to build some perfect fortress and then declare victory.
Right.
It's about constantly evaluating risk, justifying the controls you need using solid financial and ethical arguments, ensuring those controls are actually working, and always, always aligning everything you do with the business's tolerance for downtime, that MTD. Learning to speak that language of risk, especially using quantitative measures like ALE, that's what elevates you to being a trusted decision maker.
And let's circle back just as we wrap up to that ethical dimension we touched on. It's a tough one. We acknowledge that technology is never really neutral. It carries the values and biases of its creators, and that its impacts, both good and bad, often land unevenly across society. That whole issue of technology justice.
Yeah. So given that immense and frankly growing ethical responsibility that falls on security professionals, the responsibility to try and ensure the technologies they design and protect actually serve the common good and don't inadvertently worsen existing inequalities. Here's the final thought to chew on. What do you think is the single most important ethical quality, maybe call it a virtue, that a cybersecurity professional needs to actively cultivate within themselves to navigate this incredible complexity and help steer technology towards serving society justly?
That's a deep question to end on, something for everyone to reflect on. Well, thank you for guiding us through this incredibly dense but vital domain. This has been fantastic.
My pleasure. It's crucial stuff.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone, for joining us on the deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.